Hi everyone, it's Britt Hartley of No Nonsense Spirituality, and I want to share my experience of my 1 month in Japan, but also use that experience as an opportunity to talk about how atheism in the West differs from atheism in the East. So this was my first time in Japan. I had been to Thailand like about 10 years ago and did some study of Buddhism when I was there, but this is my first time in Japan. I've always wanted to go, and I really thought that I would be drawn to exploring the different sects of Buddhism. Like in the West, sometimes we think of Buddhism as this like monolithic secular thing, but just like Christianity or any other religion, it can feel really different in different cultures. Like being an Irish Catholic can feel different than being a Catholic in Latin America. And Buddhism in Thailand is different than Buddhism in Japan. And even in Japan, there's lots of different kinds of Buddhism to explore. So that's what I really thought that I would be doing. Because in Thailand, when I was there, Buddhism really felt like a visible public religion. Like you saw every day monks in saffron robes receiving alms, people making merit, which I'll talk about in a second. And there was just like a clear distinction between monastic community and ordinary life. So Thailand is predominantly Theravada Buddhist with a strong emphasis on karma, rebirth, merit making, and monastic discipline. So for example, when I first went to Thailand, our driver told us that he had spent 3 months as a monk as a young adult, and that was very common. And he also described Buddhism in Thailand as being very superstitious, that people wore, certain things for kind of something like good luck. And then there's this idea of merit making, which is the Buddhist idea of making good actions that create beneficial spiritual consequences for this life, future life, or even loved ones. So in Thailand, that, common forms of merit making would be like donating to temples, sponsoring ceremonies, giving food and money to monks, donating to temples. And the logic is like tied to karma, that wholesome actions are going to generate merit, which can lead to better circumstances and spiritual progress or a more favorable rebirth. And people also may dedicate or like transfer merit to deceased relatives. And in practice, what it turns into is prosperity gospel, right? Like you make donations before you do anything in order to get the benefits. So like before you open a business, you would make a donation of food or money. And it was just really fascinating to like explore Buddhism, but also explore a Buddhist country where like the prosperity gospel, which is just a human thing that we do, where we are always trying to do rituals to feel like we have more control than we do, and see that kind of like pop up in a completely different religion. But Japan has an entirely different Buddhist history. So Japanese Buddhism is Mahayana, and it includes traditions like Zen Buddhism and Pure Land and all kinds of other ones. Priests are often married, and temples are frequently passed down through families. And Buddhism is really woven deeply into ancestor rituals and memorial practices and funerals. And so Buddhism mixed with this deep connection to ancestry in Japan because it kind of co-evolved there alongside Shinto, without people necessarily feeling like they ever have to choose one religion over another. So in Japan, there'll be some things that you may do that are Shinto or Confucianist or Buddhist, and they all kind of mix together because there's not an Abrahamic God saying like, only I exist, right? So I did some time exploring that, like both the differences in the approach to Buddhism and also just like the feel and experience of it. But I actually didn't spend as much time studying that as I thought I would, because I absolutely fell in love with Shinto and spent the rest of the trip kind of ignoring the Buddha and really diving into it. I promise this won't be a travel log for much longer. I have a point with this, so just stay with me. I have a point. So Shinto is Japan's indigenous spiritual tradition. It doesn't begin with one god or one founder or one set of beliefs, which is sometimes hard for the Western brain to understand. It begins with kami. And again, this is kind of difficult for our language because we don't have a great word or translation for it, but it's something like sacred presence connected to nature, particular places, forces of life, and ancestors. It's like a living relationship to the land, to places, to family, and to like aspects of life, like harvest or fertility or protection or prosperity. And so kami is like, it's not always gods in the Western sense, but it's also not like metaphorical energy. So it's very hard to describe. It's something in between those two things. They can be understood as sacred beings or presences connected to like a mountain or a river or an ancestor or a community. But it's less about like signing on to a creed and more about living respectfully within a world that is already alive with meaning that you belong to, that you're a part of. And so these shrines are places where people can pause and connect to the sacredness of life and express gratitude, and mark important moments in life and just really connect to the history of that place and the beauty of that place. And it was just really embodied and really relational versus, based on a founder or a book or a god or a specific god. And so the place that I felt this the most strongly was Fushimi Inari in Kyoto. This is the shrine that people recognize from the thousands of orange arches, which are actually called torii gates. And a torii gate marks movement from the ordinary space into a sacred space, right? And so when you walk through, it's just symbolizing, hey, we're making a transition here that helps your brain and your body kind of transition into paying attention to the sacred space. And so at Fushimi Inari, you pass through gate after gate as you climb an entire mountain that is considered holy. And what makes it so connective across generations is that these gates were not all built at once. Individuals, families, and businesses have donated them over centuries, sometimes in gratitude for something received or in hope, some hope that they have for their family that I also have for my family. And the names and dates are written on the gates. So as you walk through them, it was truly an extraordinary experience. As you're walking through them, you're walking through history. You're walking through layer after layer of humans who were really just like you, and their hopes and their gratitude and their fear and their work and their family and their memory and their stories. And some of these gates go back to the Edo period, and some new ones are still being added. And so it's truly like walking through history in a really embodied and beautiful way. And so I'm walking through this and I find myself burst into tears. Like I'm just crying, like not just like, oh, this is really beautiful, I'm just going to tear up a little bit. Like the kind of crying where it's like a really strong emotion that shows that you've tapped into something really deep, some kind of deep wound. And when I'm feeling a strong emotion like that, I really try to not jump into psychoanalyzing it right away, because that can be a way that my brain sometimes will avoid overwhelming feelings. So I didn't do that. I just allowed myself as I was walking to just feel whatever was coming up for me. And I just cried. Like I must have looked insane because I'm just like this white girl walking through arches, just like bawling. But it was really, really powerful. And so in the moment, as I'm walking through, again, centuries of humans just like me, writing down their hopes and dreams and their appreciation of the sacred, and I'm crying, it's really one of the most beautiful spiritual experiences I've ever had. But it was like crying to the point where I had to check in with myself later and like, hey, what's going on with you, girl? Because that was a lot of crying. that was a little bit much. And so I realized later as I was exploring why this was so emotional for me, like why I was having that kind of response. And it was because in the West, because we build on faith and we went all in on building on foundations on historical truth claims that you have to believe are true, that when you don't believe those things, you lose your access to your community and your identity and your ancestry and your sense of belonging. And that helped me understand something about Japanese religion, or sometimes Eastern religion in general, that I deeply, deeply envy. That you do not have to believe, in Shinto, in this place, you do not have to believe every supernatural claim for the place or the ritual or the connection to your ancestors for that to remain meaningful. Like the sacred is living in participation and relationality and embodiment and continuity and ritual and festivals and our way of life. And all of that is just so connective and just really taps into our need for belonging, instead of building only on belief. Because for centuries, each one of these families or people maybe had different ideas about what metaphysical reality is. They may have changed their mind about things or learned new things with science. But for them, changing your mind or learning new things didn't cut them off from building their own gate with their own families and continuing the rituals and their way of life. And so for me as an ex-Mormon and an ex-Christian, it feels like the second I couldn't believe in the truth claims anymore, it's like I lost access to the shrine of my own history. So like my youngest child just turned 8, and if I was Mormon, my entire extended family on both sides would have gathered together for a baptism, where they are welcomed into the community. And, the community makes certain promises and the child makes certain promises. And my kids don't have access to something that I try sometimes to like makeshift things, but they're not going to show up with the food and the clothing and the rituals and the songs, the same way as, when Mormons do it in my family. And if someone gets married in my family, I sit outside the walls and I'm not allowed to witness it. The identity and belonging to a community that I grew up with can't pass on. I can't pass on that community to my kids. It ended with me because I don't believe the truth claims. And so when my family gathers at Christmas time to remember a child who died in our family, and that family said, how we want to mark, the date of her death is we want everyone to go to the temple, I'm not allowed to participate in that collective recognition of grief. I am asked before you go into the temple, do you believe that Joseph Smith was a true prophet? Do you believe XYZ? And you have to say yes or no. And I like honesty, like I really don't like lying. And so I told the truth, and I lost my temple recommend a long time ago. Before I even left Mormonism, I had lost it. And then the college that me and my partner went to, my kids are not allowed to attend that college the way that I see some families, have like this is their college and their kids attend that college or whatever. My kids aren't allowed to attend because you have to talk to a bishop and you have to believe certain dogmas in order to attend that school. And so I think that's like the cost of the West. It may be more extreme in Mormonism, but this applies way beyond Mormonism. When you build in Abrahamic religions, specifically Christianity and Islam more than Judaism, but when you build on faith and truth claims so that when those fall, what happens is that everything else is going to fall with it. And because Eastern religions didn't build on faith, Shinto has no founder, no holy text, no God, no metaphysics you have to believe in. What it allowed them to do is continue the connection, continue the culture, continue the sense of the sacred, even if people believe different things about what the world is. And I didn't realize how painful that still was for me years after religious deconstruction and reconstructing my life, that it was still painful for me to lose my access to history and community and belonging that I experienced in this shrine. And this is why atheism in the West is so different than atheism in the East. In the West, we literally set up the conditions for atheism. And then in the East, it's more like non-theistic than atheistic, because it doesn't really matter that you're atheistic at all. Like, you're just not really rotating around a theistic God in general. And so because Christianity, especially Protestant Christianity, came to define religion primarily through belief, like, do you believe in God? Do you believe Jesus was resurrected? Do you believe the Bible is true? Do you believe the correct doctrines about salvation? And when religion is built primarily around believing the right things, atheism just is the natural response to the moment when you say no. And theology school, as I've covered in another video, is really like an atheist creating machine. Like, it turned me into an atheist and many others, because the second you look into this more, and say, no, like, I just don't believe that happened, or no, I don't believe this book comes from God. No, I don't believe this institution has divine authority. Then the whole structure falls apart. So you don't just lose a belief about the metaphysical nature of reality. You lose the rituals that marked your life. You lose the language that you used for grief and how to deal with death. Like, you lose the community that witnessed your children growing up, and the stories that connected you to your grandparents and great-grandparents, and the places where your family gathered to make meaning, just because you know things about the world that people 2,000 years ago didn't. So Western atheism often carries the architecture of Christianity even while rejecting Christianity, because we're so used to this foundation. And like, definitely for me too, like, Christianity taught us that where you start is believing propositions. And so atheism becomes an identity around rejecting those propositions. And so we keep asking the Christian question, but is it literally true? And sometimes that is the question we have to ask, like truth matters. I'm not interested in preserving harmful institutions or pretending supernatural claims are true just because the traditions can be beautiful. But what I love about Eastern atheism or non-theism is that it's just not rotating around truth claims about God at all. Like that's just not the foundation that they're building on. And so is it literally true? It's just not a question that we have to grapple with so seriously that you just have to say yes or no. And yes means you get all these things. You get all this identity and community and belonging and narrative and blah, blah, blah. And no means that you're cut off from all of that. Like they just are not approaching religion in that way. So a person in Japan, and I met many, can say that they're not really religious, that they don't believe in God, and still visit a shrine at New Year, and still participate in their local festivals, and honor an ancestor, and make an offering, and walk through a place that their family has visited for generations, and make their own arch with their family to add to their family story. And they do not necessarily have to resolve exactly what a kami is, or, have to have some kind of faith about what happens after death before they are allowed to participate. Like the ritual is carrying memory and gratitude and grief and hope and connection, even while people's ideas about reality or about the world are changing. And so I want to be careful here because I don't want to turn Japan into some fantasy where like religion is just perfectly flexible and nobody's excluded. Like Japanese religion has institutions and hierarchies. Buddhism definitely has patriarchy and hierarchy and all kinds of problems and drug rings. There's superstitions, there's politics, there's commercialization, and like all the human problems that religions have show up here too, because these are humans, right? And also like Eastern religion is an enormous category containing a lot of completely different traditions. So I don't want to like sugarcoat this, but if we can just take for a second just a bird's eye view where you're doing some generalizations, we can see that there is some contrast in how we built our foundations in the East and West. And so maybe like what I really envied when walking through Fushimi Inari was not like Shinto itself. Like where I live, I have no access to Shinto at all. I don't have anyone in my life who practices Shinto. It's not something I want to like convert to. What I envied is the architecture of belonging. And I was reminded painfully, just in contrast, at how atheists and post-Christians in the West experience a kind of spiritual homelessness when we don't believe. And so I envied the idea that generations could leave something behind for the next generations to walk through without demanding that everyone arrive at the same metaphysical conclusions in order to walk through that gate. Like you could still have doubts and walk through that gate. You could understand the kami literally or symbolically or culturally or emotionally, or not understand them at all and still come to the shrine with your gratitude, with your fear, with your hope for your children, with your awareness that you belong to something older than yourself. And I think this is one of the deepest problems facing the West and facing Western atheists. Like, okay, we became intellectually free, fine, but culturally we became really homeless because white Christianity in particular, in its colonialism, really squashed or incorporated all other kinds of culture that it ran up against, so that all that existed was Christianity. And it's like, what is white culture in America without Christianity? Like mayonnaise? Like, I don't know. Like we started, again, white culture, indigenous populations have their own culture in America, but white culture in America, we don't have anything before Christianity. We started with Christianity. Like, what is our culture without it? Like, we really don't know. So yeah, maybe we did escape systems that demanded belief and the sexual abuse and were wrong and were problematic and were supporting Christian nationalism, even sometimes subtly or in subtle ways. But we often lost the structures that helped human beings experience continuity and ritual and reverence and ancestry and belonging because of how we set up religion. And then sometimes we act as though those needs were childish religious leftovers that enlightened people just don't need and we should simply outgrow. But like, human beings did not stop needing rites of passage just because we stopped believing in God. And I think this is the mistake that we made in the science forward skeptical West, was assuming that if the story behind the ritual was not literally true, then the ritual itself is useless. And so we would look at indigenous cultures or traditional societies with elaborate rites of passage, ceremonies that move someone from childhood into adulthood. And we would focus on the mythology surrounding them. And maybe the initiate was being introduced to the ancestors, or receiving a new spiritual identity or new name, or symbolically dying and being reborn in some embodied way. And from a secular perspective, we said, well, none of that is literally real. So this is all primitive superstition, throw it away. But we failed to ask in the moment, what is the ritual doing? Because puberty is a period of enormous physical and psychological and social change. Your body is changing, your relationship to your parents changes, your sexuality changes, your expectations shift. And suddenly you're supposed to understand who you are and where you belong. And the rite of passage takes all of that invisible confusion and gives it a visible structure. It says, hey, you were a child. You have now crossed a threshold. You have endured something difficult. The adults have witnessed it. Now the community recognizes you differently. You have new responsibilities, but you also have a new place among us. And this is incredibly powerful form of psychological orientation that really, really helps a teen brain. And so the ritual gives the mind a before and an after. It gives the young person a story for what's happening to them. And it makes adulthood something that the community welcomes them into, rather than something that they're just kind of expected to stumble into alone. And instead of preserving that function while maybe questioning the supernatural explanation, we just kind of threw away the whole thing. And so now we have young people, like they're getting their driver's license later, they may not go to college, they may not get married, they may not be moving out, and they're struggling in, when am I an adult, right? Like, who's seeing me, who's trusting me, who's helping me understand what this new role means. And so people can be 25, 30, or even 40 and still feel like they're waiting for some kind of internal sensation or life event that tells them that they've become an adult. Because being adult has never been just like a biological fact, like you were a child yesterday and you're an adult today. It's a social identity that other people recognize and confer. And so the mistake was just thinking that just because the mythology was not scientifically true, that nothing true or valuable was happening. And that's where atheism becomes too shallow sometimes in the West, because it became very good at asking, did this supernatural event literally occur? And they were much less interested in asking, what human problem was this tradition trying to solve? Because children still need to be welcomed into a community. Teenagers still need transition into adulthood. Couples still need their commitments to be recognized. Families still need rituals for grief. We still need seasonal gatherings and shared stories and places that carry memory and a way of belonging and a way of passing down wisdom and a way to connect to the world. We are so starving for these things in the West. We talk about it. Everybody's talking about it all the time because there's just this ache, there's just this, the meaning crisis that continues to grow. And religion did not invent those needs, but Christianity and Islam in particular were the most effective at organizing those needs into one system and colonizing and spreading it around the world. And so when we lose access to that system due to loss of belief, we lose a lot more than just faith. And so that's the wound that Fushimi Inari touched in me, because I have rebuilt meaning. I've built a secular spiritual life. I've studied ritual and mysticism and philosophy and psychology and the science of human well-being, and I know how to create meaningful experiences for myself and my family. I understand that this can be rebuilt. And I think I've done a fairly good job in recreating my family culture with intention from scratch. But what I cannot do is I cannot personally manufacture centuries of continuity that I can pass to my children. I cannot create what this shrine was for the people who live there. I cannot create the feeling of walking through something my ancestors built, because I'm the first, I'm the first person to not be Mormon or not be Christian for so many years that we've lost the history of when that even happened. Like I can begin building it, but I cannot give my children the full depth of a tradition and a community that was cut off from them before it even reached them. And that's why that's the area where Western atheism has to grow up a little bit and do more than just critique religion and debate theists. Because what are post-Christians or atheists to do in the West when they don't have an access to a place like this and we're longing for it? So here are the couple things that can help if you find yourself in a place of spiritual homelessness. First, rebuilding your family culture with intention. Religions hand down a calendar, rituals, stories, meals, songs, moral education, ways of marking birth and adolescence and marriage and death and changing seasons, and a liturgical calendar and saints and story. And once you leave, none of that is automatically replaced for you. You have to decide what your family gathers around and what values you repeat and how you remember the dead, how you welcome a child, how you recognize someone becoming an adult. In August, I'll be doing a 4-week course with John Ogden of secular spirituality for kids and families to give people resources and a template for beginning that work. So stay tuned for that. And of course, this was, really what my book was about also. Second, rediscover the roots that may have existed before Christianity absorbed them. This is a reason why many people, especially women, are exploring paganism and folk traditions and ancestral practices and solstices and seasonal festivals and the histories of the places that their families come from. That doesn't mean that we can pretend like we're perfectly resurrecting an ancient religion or claiming an identity that we didn't really inherit. It's just about becoming curious about like what your ancestors did to mark winter or harvest or birth or death before Christianity became the container for everything. And we can study those traditions and just kind of recover what remains and allow them to inspire us to incorporate some of those things or inspire new practices without pretending that we've, traveled backwards in time. Third, we have to invest so much more time and money and resources into building secular community instead of just consuming secular content. So Western secularism and atheism has produced excellent books and podcasts and debates. I think we do very well in debates, conferences, online creators, even like me. But information is not the same as belonging. Like a podcast is not going to hold your hand and attend your mother's funeral. Like a TikTok cannot witness your child growing up. We need secular gatherings and neighborhood meals and rites of passage and grief circles and Sunday communities and service projects and choirs and camps and physical places that people return to year after year. And we have to be able to give these things our time and money if we want that belonging that we are so longing for. Religious communities exist because generations of people showed up and volunteered and donated and taught children and maintained places and kept traditions alive. And we can't expect secular community to possess that same depth if we're not really, willing to have that kind of intention or even sacrifice. Fourth, secularism has to become less allergic to, for me, even the word spirituality, ritual, reverence, sacred language, pilgrimage, going somewhere in order to have an inner experience. And I think too often, because of our religious trauma and wanting to not be woo, the second someone lights a candle or creates a ceremony or speaks, talks to an ancestor in their mind or calls a forest sacred, that another atheist has to explain, hey, this is just woo woo, there's no magic here. Like, we know that's not always the point though. Like a ritual, you can know that this is bullshit that's made up, and you can still deliberately create it and have it affect you in real meaningful ways. Like a place can be sacred because of the attention and memory and responsibility we bring to it, even if there's nothing special about that plot of land. Secularism has to grow up and become more than just anti-religion. And like you can say, yeah, secular humanism is doing that. They have 10 commitments instead of 10 commandments. I've asked every secular humanist, tell me your 10 commitments. They have no idea what it is. Why? Because you don't gather, you don't teach these things to your children. We don't have stories around this. We don't have any way to pass this down, because how we've done that has always been religion. That's the technology that we created. That's the cognitive technology that we created to pass down those things. So we have to be a little bit less sensitive to some of these things if you want to have tools for the meaning crisis, if you want Gen Z to be less anxious and less depressed and have more belonging. Fifth, we have to be careful when we steal other traditions. White women especially, deservingly, should be called out for becoming spiritually homeless and then walking into other cultures, shrines, taking over and then reselling it, like repackaging it. We've done this with yoga. We've done this with specific kinds of sage that indigenous communities have asked us to respect, that this is sacred to them and to not overproduce, but then we just overtake it and kind of sell around them so that they're not even involved. We've done this in psychedelics, where we've taken these medicines outside of guides and ethical boundaries that evolved with these medicines. We've done this with meditation, where we take it again out of its history and ethics and make it just into a productivity tool. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't touch anything just because you have no culture. Whenever I say things like that, people are always like, you just hate white people. This is just white guilt, or this is just political posturing or virtue signaling. It just means that when you're walking into another culture's sacred places, like I did for the last month, you don't just take it over and resell it and cut out the very people who have maintained these traditions because we're a little bit more used to colonialism and capitalism, that we just are willing to just do that and not think about the ethics of that. So we can walk into these spaces and explore and integrate some of these things, and these cultures are often something like meditation. We're happy to share these tools with you, but that doesn't mean like take it over, rebrand it, resell it, and cut out all the people who have maintained those traditions, which sometimes white people will do. And finally, we have to accept that the first generation of rebuilding may feel awkward and incomplete. We cannot manufacture centuries of continuity in one lifetime. The first family ritual that you do may feel made up because it is made up. Like the first secular rite of passage may not carry the emotional force of one that's been practiced for 500 years. But continuity in these tools and these resources have to begin somewhere. And so maybe our work is not to like instantly recreate what was lost, or like try to build Shinto in Boise, Idaho, where I am, but to just leave behind the first gate, to build something honest and meaningful that our children can walk through and add to and eventually pass on to theirs, that they have some sense of wisdom and tools and resources and rituals and family culture that give them some kind of grounding and sense of belonging in this world. Now, I actually went to the gym and then came back to finish this video, and I can already tell I'm getting better at like guessing what the comments are going to be. I can already tell that some of the comments are going to be, hey, I don't believe in some or all of the historical truth claims, and I'm still a Christian. And so the way forward is just to like help Christianity lose some of its dogma and truth claims over time. But like, let's keep the culture, let's keep the parables of Jesus. And that attempt is tempting, and that was my approach for a while. But for me, there ended up being a few issues with that. One is just like intellectual honesty that can come up when you have that tension between community and authenticity. Am I really giving up too much authenticity for this community? And for some churches, the answer is yes. For some, the answer is no. Like I know UU can be a place where you can do sacrament rituals and be an atheist and all of that. But the bigger issue that I want to address is returning to Christianity, this foundation that we've built in the West. Is that the answer? Is that what we want to build on, even in its like most highly nuanced form, for where we want to go with human society? If our end goal is a thriving society that is built on the foundation of human well-being, that we're building society towards human thriving and human well-being, is the foundation of Christianity going to be the long-term way to get there? And when I was honest with myself with that question, when I was doing my nuanced Christianity, the answer was no, because Christianity has so many elements of historical truth claims and faith and the Bible itself, which is problematic. And just seeing what most Christians do with Christianity, let's say 1,000 years into the future, is Christianity really the foundation that is the best to build on? And expect everyone with human nature to not get sucked into all the problems and all the dogmatism, and to have a highly nuanced approach to Christianity, where they have deconstructed and reinterpreted every single aspect of that. Is that really a fair ask? Is that really going to be the best way for us to create that kind of society? And to me, that answer was no, which then demanded from my integrity that if my answer is no, I need to start building what I feel like is on a more sure foundation, even though I may be the first one in thousands of years, maybe ever. I don't know how long we've been doing religion, at least, 100,000 years. We have elements of seeing, religious things and burials and things like that. I may be the first one in a very, very long time to be recreating a family culture from scratch with no kind of mythology or religion or religious community or anything like that. And that is hard, but I feel like to start building is a way that I can build a more sure foundation for human thriving for myself and my children and my community, even if it takes a little bit more work. And that is the challenge of spiritual homelessness. We cannot simply return to beliefs we no longer hold, but we can't survive indefinitely, especially with the meaning crisis with Gen Z. We cannot survive indefinitely by just spending so much time critiquing religion and making fun of religious people. Like, we have to become builders again, because walking through that shrine was sacred in a way that I have not experienced in the West, especially since I left religion. There's nothing in secularism that was like what I went through there, where you can experience it and it didn't demand any faith of me. And I want to build that, but we don't have that here because we built on the foundation of faith. So that's where I'm at. Let me know what you think about this one.